got news for you. Majority of preaching is about reminding you of what you already know, but you need to be activated so you can actually live what you know, and not just know what you say you know, but actually activate it in real life, in real time, so you can see the fruits of God in your life. My friends, I got news for you. Bible says don't just be a hearer of the word, be a doer of the word. So if you're coming to church waiting for some type of epiphany, you missed it. It's about reminding you of what you already know, but you're not doing. I challenge you, go read the Bible for yourself. One of the most used words in the Old Testament is the word remember. Constantly, God has to come and remind his people of who he is and who they are in him. He reminds them that he's the same God that opened the Red Sea. He's the same God that made them cross the Jordan. He's the same God that made a way where there seems to be no way. He's the same God that provided manna from heaven. He's the same God who says, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. He's the same God that says, he that began a good work in you will finish it. Today, my friends, I'm here to remind you about the goodness of the Lord and how you've lost sight of him and you made life about you. Take your eyes off of you and put it back on Jesus, the finisher of your faith. Give him some praise in this place. Let me remind you how desperate you used to be for the Lord. Let me remind you that you said, God, I will serve you. Let me remind you that you told God that, God, if you come through, I will come after you. Let me remind you today that you told God a lot of things that you forgot. Let me remind you that there was come a time in your life that you came to this altar and you cried your eye out and you said, God, whatever it takes, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to live for you. I'm going to live my life according to your will. Let me remind you today that you have made some commitments, you made some vows, and you forgot, and you need to come back to your first love. Come back to where you belong. Allow me to be a reminder of God's goodness today. Let me remind you today, there was a time where you used to look forward to go to church. Let me remind you that you used to love serving. Let me remind you that you were like one of those psalmists who says, I was glad when it said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Let me remind you, you used to worship openly. Let me remind you, you used to cry in the presence of God. Let me remind you, you used to worship. Let me remind you, you used to praise. Let me remind you that God has been good to you and your family. Let me remind you. Married people, let me remind you that one day you walk down the aisle and you grab a hold of your spouse and before God and witnesses and you said, I vow to be committed to you. I vow to be faithful to you. I vow, come hell or high water, I vow to be your faithful, devoted servant. I vow to be your husband. I vow to be your spouse. Let me remind you of your vows you made before a holy God. Let me remind you how good he has been to you.